All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Aris Gregorian, and I'm excited to be hosting this webinar on esports and patents today. Before we dive in, um, just a quick housekeeping. We'll be emailing a link to the recording and the slides to all attendees after the webinar, and feel free to drop any questions in the chat as we go. So with that, I'm excited to introduce our panel of experts, including Triet Nguyen, Rob Stanz, Kirt Iverson, and Amelia Cohoes. And I will also, if we have time, be moderating a discussion with them later on. So quick rundown of what we'll be covering today. We're going to discuss the evolution and history of esports, key stakeholders and business models, trademark filings and disputes, patent analytics and activities, and then a deep dive on an example of an esports patent litigation. So a lot of info to unpack. So let's just jump right in.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Trademark Nguyen, I'm a principal at Triet Nguyen. And to begin the discussion today, let's kind of set the parameters or the framework of what esports that we're talking about. So we're not talking about betting sites or anything related to gambling, but here it's involving competitive gaming between pro players, and it has to be in an organized format. So that's either in a tournament or a league, and it has to be played for some sort of prize. So that's either money, items, or a title. So to get into the history of how esports started, we have to go all the way back to 1950. And this was the first display of a competitive game, not between two people, but between a human and an automated component. It was created by a Canadian engineer, Joseph Cates, for the Canadian National Exhibition in Toronto. And as you can see in the photo, what it was you could go up, press position on the keypad. That move that you played would show either an O or an X on the light display in the back. So one important distinction is that this is not considered the first video game, because video games involve moving images, and that was a static light display. So there's no video images, even though it's considered one of the first competitive games in the world. The machine was huge. It was 13 foot or 4 meters high. And unfortunately, after the exhibition was over, it was dismantled in 2 weeks. So there's no version of this in existence at all anymore. Next slide, please. So here we're going to play a little bit clip of what is considered probably the first video game. It was created in 1958 at the Brookhaven National Lab by a physicist, William Higginbotham. He actually worked at the Los Alamos lab during World War II on the Manhattan Project. So he built the electronics for the atomic bomb. And you can see here, two players use the metal controller where they hit a facsimile of a ball back and forth. And yeah, pretty good display of competitive gaming for tennis between two players. It's considered the first video game because the display that they used showed moving images. And back then the technology was pretty primitive. Display was just an oscilloscope. Next slide, please. So we have to move on to 1972 for the first technical esports tournament hosted in the world. And it wasn't hosted by scientists or anything. It was hosted by a writer, Stuart Brand, for Rolling Stone magazine. So in an effort to kind of publicize the magazine and also to jump on this new era of technology, he organized a tournament between a total of 5 players at the Artificial Intelligence Lab at Stanford. It involved a game called Space War that was implemented on the very first computer from Digital Equipment Corporation. It was, the cost was $120,000. So if you adjust it for inflation today, that's almost $1 million. And it ran at a whopping speed of 5 megahertz. So when you compare that to computer devices and phones that are running in the gigahertz, it was not very fast, but at the time it was state of the art. And as you can see on the image on the right, Bruce Bunger was the champion. And instead of winning prize money, he won a year subscription to Rolling Stone magazine. Next slide, please. So the takeaway from this slide is you can see the progression of esports tournaments throughout the US and also eventually to the world stage. So in 1980, Atari organizes the first national tournament involving 10,000 people across the US. They played to basically be the high score for Space Invaders. The ultimate grand prize was a $2,000 arcade machine, so it wasn't a huge prize pool. And Rebecca Henneman, who is actually here from Southern California from Whittier, she eventually won the tournament. And with the popularity of Nintendo in 1990, they organized the Nintendo World Championships. That toured 29 US cities, and the format was it was a timed event of 3 different games. It was Mario Brothers, a racing game called Rad Racer, and then Tetris. So people would compete to score the highest score for these timed gaming events. And the ultimate prize was a $10,000 US saving bonds, a 1990 convertible Geo Metro, a 40-inch projection, rear projection TV, and then last but not least, they got a specialized limited version of the Nintendo World Championship cartridge. And the interesting thing about this cartridge, it's become a huge collector's item. At one point, one of these winning cartridges sold for $100,000 on eBay. So everything connected to this event became collector's items. Moving on to 2000, South Korea hosted the first World Cyber Games, vaulting esports onto the global stage. It was a $20,000 prize pool. And then, not to be outdone, in 2001, the first Counter-Strike tournament was hosted in Dallas, was a $150,000 prize pool. And then over in France in 2003, the Electronic Sports World Cup was held, which had PC and console games, and also similarly with a $150,000 Euro prize pool. Next slide, please. So here we're talking about more recent competitive gaming history. This will cover the later the odds all the way up to 2013. And I'll quickly run through some of these, and you can recognize a lot of these logos that we have on the right-hand side. So in 2009, Riot Games releases League of Legends. 2010, Blizzard releases StarCraft 2, which is their real-time strategy game, and esports tournaments were commenced shortly thereafter. In 2011, the first League of Legends World Championship was hosted at DreamHack in Sweden. Similarly, it was also a $100,000 tournament prize pool. But then interestingly, something happened in 2013 where Dota 2, which was a multiplayer online battle arena video game released by Valve, the makers of Half-Life, they really upped the ante. They held a tournament in Seattle, and they broke the $1 million prize pool amount. I mean, not even $1 million. They broke it and had a $2.8 million total prize pool. So that significantly raised the stakes for esports tournaments and brought even more attention to this whole phenomenon. And last but not least, Twitch, even though it was released a few years ago, the iteration that we see and are familiar with today came into, I guess, public popularity in 2013. So it was significant popularity, and gamers and streamers were flocking to the platform and relying it as a crucial medium for esports viewership. Next slide, please. And I'll quickly go through this. This also shows some of the more recent competitive gaming history and the proliferation of all these important pieces of IP. 2016, Blizzard launches Overwatch, which was their team-based first-person shooter, and then, of course, their tournaments that followed shortly thereafter. In March 2017, PlayerUnknown Battlegrounds, or PUBG, was a battle royale game where instead of playing maybe teams against each other as every man for themselves, it became a huge global sensation, driving esports popularity to even greater heights. And in September 2017, in somewhat of a copycat move, Fortnite introduced Fortnite Battle Royale, which is also a battle royale game. So something interesting happened here. The makers of PUBG were, I guess, distraught by the introduction of Fortnite. So in January 2018, they actually filed a copyright infringement lawsuit in South Korea against the makers of Fortnite, alleging copyright infringement. But the other interesting thing to point out was both of these companies had a common investor, Tencent Gaming in China. So it wasn't explained what happened, but as of June of 2018, that copyright infringement lawsuit was dropped. So we don't have, or at least I couldn't surface any reason why the copyright infringement lawsuit was dropped. But if you read the tea leaves and between the lines, probably what happened was that common investor told them to work out their differences. And that's exactly what happened. And the lawsuit was dropped. In 2018, not to be outdone, Riot Games released their version of a first-person shooter. Riot, of course, being known for the creators of League of Legends. And something significant happened in 2023. The Gamers Aid organization, which is funded by the Saudi Arabia Sovereign Fund, hosted a esports tournament in Saudi Arabia with the largest prize pool of all time, $45 million. So to give a sense of how the money looks like in the breakdown between that, let's take a look at the next slide. Next slide, please. So that tournament in Saudi Arabia, as you can see, the takeaway here is you can see on the low end for StarCraft, you have a prize pool of $500,000, but all the way up to the high end of $15 million for the Dota 2 tournament. So at the very least, most of these games, between the 12 games, there was a prize purse of at least $1 million, showing that a lot of organizations are willing to put significant money behind esports and really believe in the platform and where it's heading for the future. Next slide, please. And this is just to show the progression of how it started and where it is now. Again, we go back to the photograph in 1972 with the Space War tournament between 5 people. And if you look at the image on the right, that's the Chase Center in San Francisco. There's about 20,000 people there. It's a live setting. People are paying money for tickets to experience this at a live event. Next slide, please. And to show you visually and viscerally a clip of the tournament. So you can see it's pretty exciting. People are getting into it. It's like any other live event that you may see and pay money for. And really, these people are not, they're not crazy to pay money for this, because this is a legit event where people are into the teams and just having a good time.
Treat.
Yes.
Can you comment on the varsity programs that some of the schools are offering and scholarships and so on for some of these competitors, and also the Olympics possibly bringing esports in?
Oh, that's true. Very good point, Kirt. So as far as university programs and also higher education, there's actually close to, believe it or not, 200 programs throughout different higher educational institutions here in the US. So instead of maybe going to school to play basketball or tennis, you can now get a scholarship to play esports at different colleges and universities and have that be as a viable career path after you finish your education. And as far as the Olympics, maybe you can fill me in on that. I wasn't aware about that, but it sounds exciting.
Yep. Esports was included in a demonstration event at the 2016 Asian Games, and it's considered to be a prelude to the potential inclusion in the Olympics going forward.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So yeah, it's interesting. Hopefully, so the Olympics are coming here to Southern California in LA I believe in 2028. So maybe I'll be able to check it out and have an opportunity to take my kids and see it in person.
Yeah, and some of the people in the chat have mentioned that University of Maryland and MIT have fantastic esports teams.
Okay, great. That's good to know. Yeah, and here in Southern California, where I work from, University of California, Irvine has an esports team. But if you look at the list, if you go to Wikipedia and look at the list of different schools, it's extensive. It's all throughout the country. So just to show that this whole sport and format, it's legitimate to the point where educational institutions have taken notice and considered it a viable career path. Okay, great. So after seeing that clip, you're probably wondering, who are the players involved, who are the entities, and how does the money and revenue flow? And on the next slide, please. Yes, okay, here we go. So here, this is showing the nature. It's a multi-headed economic beast. So there's 7 different entities and a total of 16 streams of revenue. So I'll start here in the middle with the game publishers. They send their publisher fees to the organizers of the tournaments, and they also share revenue with the teams. And then the organizers right below there, they share the publisher fees with the teams themselves. The sponsors and the advertisers in the upper right-hand corner, they send their fees to the teams, the organizers, and also the pro players. And then the teams, they pay a salary and prize money to the pro players themselves. So in the upper left-hand side, the streaming platforms, they share revenue with the players, with the teams, and the organizers of the tournaments. And then the consumers, the people who are consuming the content and viewing the content, they send donations, subscriptions to the pro players. They also purchase merchandise from the teams. And at the same time, they send donations and purchase subscriptions from the streaming platforms. So what you should take away here, if you're a team, if you're a pro player, you're in a good place because you get the most amount of incoming revenue. So both of them have 5 different incoming streams of revenue that are possible. So being involved in one of those things will increase your chance of getting money. Next slide, please. And you can see here, a lot of these logos are very recognizable for the publishers and the tournament organizers. I'm not going to go into it, but you can take a look. I'm sure everyone recognizes a lot of these brands and companies. Next slide, please. Again, same thing here. A lot of very recognizable logos for live streaming platforms, teams, and sponsors. And the one thing I want to point out with the sponsors is, look at how across the board this is. This is not limited to gaming companies. You have companies in athletic and sportswear, automakers, and financial services. It really shows that the crossover appeal of the whole esports phenomenon, it's gone global, but also across many different industries. Next slide, please. So with all the sponsorships and things like that, let's take a little bit a look at the revenue growth and where the esports global market is heading. So in 2020, it wasn't even $1 billion market size, but here in 2022, it's already gone up from 2021, from 2020, which was a 14% year-to-year growth, and then from 21 to 22, that was almost a 22% year-over-year growth. And the projection that's listed here, by 2025, it's going to go up to almost $1.9 billion. So that's pretty, I mean, I don't want to say exponential, but it's definitely in a very healthy upward trajectory. So from 2022 to 2025, that's already close to a 26% increase. So the industry is growing very rapidly. And just to give you somewhat of a comparison, here in America, Major League Soccer, their market size is around $1.3 billion. So if you look at the market size in 2022, that's comparable. It's not an apples to apples comparison because we're looking at the global esports market, but to compare against a traditional sports league, you can see it's comparable to MLS, and most people will consider MLS a viable sports leagues, and therefore you should also consider esports in the same light. In 2030, so here's something even more exciting. Projections I've seen by the end of this decade, on the low end, the market size is going to be about 4.81 billion, and on the high end, 6.75 billion. So what you see there is, even by the most conservative estimates from 2022, this market size for esports, it's going to at least double. So that's fantastic for the health of the whole phenomenon and growth of esports on a global level. Next slide, please. So compared to traditional sports leagues, esports is a little bit different. They get most of their money from sponsorships. So here you can see sponsorships are predominantly the largest amount of revenue as a source, with a little bit over $800 million. The others are a little bit less. If you want to, again, go back to the comparison with a traditional sports league, most of the sports leagues, they will get the majority of their revenue sources from streaming and also TV rights. But here in esports, it's mostly from sponsorships. Next slide, please. And finally, this is just a slide showing the most watched tournaments, where you can see the amount of airtime in hours watched. So the most popular one last year was the League of Legends Championship, and that really eclipsed the rest of the field. But I'll talk about in second and third place. That, interestingly enough, this is a tournament that got the most hours viewed. It was over in Indonesia, so that again shows the global sort of reach of esports itself. It was in Indonesia, which is probably not one of the countries that you may think of when you're thinking about esports. And the other interesting thing is, instead of being an esports tournament where maybe you have traditionally a desktop computer and a monitor, these tournaments in India were involved with mobile games. So if you go on YouTube and look at a clip, these players are actually playing on phones and things of that nature. But it shows that not only is it limited to desktop computers, but now with the introduction and popularity of games in the mobile space and mobile devices, esports tournaments that focus on mobile games themselves are becoming very viable. And next slide, and that's all I have for my section. Next, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Amelia, and she's going to go a little bit into trademarks.
Right. Thanks. Hi, I'm Amelia Cohoes. I do research and analytics here at Schwegman, Lundberg & Wesner. I'm going to be talking a little bit about trademarks. And just a note here too, that we will only be speaking about US trademarks. I know we just spent a while talking about the global nature of esports, but for this section, I'm just getting data from USPTO. This is the holdings for the top 20 companies, and you can see how much copyright protection they have. And I want to note too that these are filed by the owning company, so you might not necessarily recognize some of these names. Riot Games, the top trademark holder, is League of Legends, which is obviously one of the dominant esports, as Tret just mentioned in the previous section. Square Enix is Final Fantasy. Epic Games is Fortnite, also very popular. And NetEase, which I think is on here, has Knives Out and some others as well. All right, next slide, please. Here again, I'm looking at those same 20 companies, and this just shows their filings by year. And this is very current as of earlier this month, because when you file a trademark, it is pretty much published immediately, unlike a patent, which kind of has an 18-month window of secrecy before publication. It looks like you can see they really peaked in the late teens here, took a dip in 2020 as kind of the whole global economy sort of did, and is quickly rebounding as esports is continuing to grow. All right, next slide, please. This is the TTAB proceedings by company. TTAB is the Trademark Trial and Appeal Board, kind of an administrative court where people can, file oppositions and try to interfere with proceedings. Again, this is those same 20 companies. And you can see that these companies are rarely have to go to TTAB as a defendant, but they are actively protecting their names and their goods. And it's really important that they do because they need to have distinct, recognizable names in order to really keep market dominance, and it is on them to do it. Just like with a patent, when you have a trademark, it is on you, the owner, to protect your intellectual property and for you yourself to take action against anyone that you feel is infringing on it. So here you can see who is really active in this. All right, next slide, please. All right, so what is a trademark? A trademark is anything that distinguishes the source of a goods and services. Most commonly, that is in the form of either a name or a logo. Here are some logos that I have just chosen to show here. And you can see there's different areas that are all part of the esports network. Again, some of those championships, as we talked about last time, well, as just a few of the actual games, Overwatch, Undawn, and Fortnite. Here we have the Pepperdine's esports team. We talked a little bit about how big esports is in the academic world. And finally, TwitchCon, which I'm guessing is a event sponsored by Twitch, kind of similar to that video that we looked at in the last section. Right. Next slide, please.
Amelia, TwitchCon is coming up in October next month in Las Vegas.
Okay, good to know. Anyone can sign into that. So we talked about how a trademark is anything that distinguishes a good or services. This one area that this can also be is trade dress. Trade dress can be like packaging or the look of an item or even sometimes the look of a store. And for examples here, I've chosen, I'm going to guess that you all know what these are without me needing to say it, but I'm going to say it anyway. We've got a Nintendo controller, a Nintendo Switch, and a Nintendo GameCube.
All of these are very iconic, so they're good choices.
Yes, thank you. All right, next slide, please. So a trademark is any identifiable good. And sometimes people might have something that maybe started out functional and then became so recognizable and a part of just society's, general lexicon or knowledge base that they go on to other goods. So this is for the Sony PlayStation. And those are their controllers, the square, triangle, X, and O. But everyone really knows that. And so they've also trademarked in other areas. This particular registration lists the goods and services as napkins, plates, goods, wares, clothes, things like that, just any area that they want to protect. And I have an example of a t-shirt that they have for sale using this trademark, as well as if you can see at the end of the little rainbow, they have the shape of their controllers as well. Next slide, please. Right. So these are some Nintendo characters that have trademark protection. And again, it's so that they can be used in commerce, outside of the game on other ideas as well, and just to protect, to give them even more protection. The very last one on the right is a Princess Peach. And I just wanted to include this to talk about two different items related to trademarks. Obviously, the first Princess Peach is including color. She's got the very distinctive dress and the hair and the eyes, things like that. But the color is not claimed on the second Princess Peach there. And that's because I'm guessing that they really are trying to claim the shape and silhouette as well. Because if somebody were to say, create a new character called Princess Pear with green eyes and a green dress, Nintendo would probably be able to argue that it's confusingly similar to their trademark protection and be able to take action against that company. So sometimes being less specific in your trademark application can actually give you broader protection, as you can just say, well, I'm not only claiming this color pink, I'm claiming this entire kind of shape and look. And the reason that this one says a serial number instead of registration number 2 is that this was filed as a 1B, meaning it's not actually in commerce yet. Sometimes looking at trademark filings can show you where companies are headed or what they might soon be releasing, because they can actually file for protection, logos, things like this, up to 6 months before something hits the market and is used in commerce. And they can actually get 5 extensions on that. So sometimes up to 3 years before items hit market, you can see what a company might be considering or thinking.
Yeah, it's interesting with the release of the Super Mario Brothers movie. I wonder if there were also a lot of trademark activity right before the movie came out. I don't know the answer to that, but it'd be interesting to find out.
Yeah, I have to imagine there was. I
Yeah.
haven't looked too deeply in that, but I'm sure we could find it. All right, next slide, please. All right, I'm going to leave you guys here. It's the end of my little trademark speak, but I did want to say again, anything that distinguishes goods or service eligible for protection. Sometimes I can even include sounds. I think you'll all immediately recognize the sound on the left, and the sound on the right, I'll say, is for FIFA. It's one of the few I could find. I'll leave you with this. Thanks.
Well, thanks for that, Amelia. That was great. My name is Rob Stanz, and I'm going to be presenting on patent analytics. I'm based in Minneapolis, and I just head up the analytics group here at Schwegman. Many of the slides that I'm going to be presenting are pretty straightforward, so I'll try to keep it brief. But Triet, Kirt, please do feel free to jump in with any attorney commentary based on the charts that you see. For some background, we ran a worldwide patent search for the mention of esports within the full text. We had to do some manual coloring of the landscape to focus in on relevant filings. Some examples of this, as Triet mentioned, would be the cases that were highly focused on gambling, we left out, as well as some references to esports within furniture like gaming desks and chairs we did not include in our landscape here. The data we're presenting came out of PatSnap, and some of the visuals that I'm presenting on as well came directly from PatSnap, so I want to give them credit. Next slide. For this first slide, we're looking at the breakdown of filings versus grants based on the application filing year. For example, in 2017, you can see that there were 85 filings in blue. Of the 85 filings, 61 in green are now granted. First thing I note is the large jump in filings beginning in 2017 and continuing through 2021, which would be our last full year of data given the 18-month lag to publication for original filings. So the drop that we see in 2022 and 23, we expect that those would be close to, if not higher than what we're seeing in 2021.
Rob?
Yes.
We have a question in the chat about design patents. I don't know if this covers design patents as well as utility patents, or
Yeah, that would have been more of those the furniture, that kind of stuff, what we were seeing for design patents. So this is focused on utility.
Got it.
Thanks, Karen. And then just regarding the grant trend, as the filings are more recent, it of course makes sense to see the percentage of issued cases decrease. But if you go back to 2015, 2016 filing year, it appears the grant rate sits right around 85%. And would expect that to kind of be the trend going forward. Next slide. Here's a really simple chart breaking down status for these force cases. as a follow-up to the last slide, I note that some of the cases that were filed in 2017 through 2019 aren't yet granted. Just 6% of the non-PCT cases have been abandoned to date. So that they're definitely pursuing grants there and not dropping off with these. Close to 50% of the esports cases are active grants and 36% are pending. And I'll be providing some more status details in an upcoming slide here.
Yeah, the only point I wanted to make, Rob, was that it's good to see that many of these filings have been granted, and also that they're still pending. So the abandonment rate seems to be pretty low. So that shows the significance of the importance of these filings for these different assignees.
Yep. Thanks, Trent. Next slide. Here's a look at the top countries that are being filed in. Here you can see that the US is the highest filing country for esports, followed by PCT filings, China, the EPO, Japan, Korea, and then assortment of countries with a small amount of filings. The chart on the right provides a glimpse into the year-by-year filings on the top countries. The US appears to be a few years ahead of the rest of the world. However, I do note a similar upward trend in filings throughout global. Again, wanted to note the 18-month lag, which is why you're seeing the drop off in 2022 to 2023, but you'll see a consistent 10 to 20 to 30 within those global countries, and I would say growing.
And I agree with that. I think what we'll see as more data comes in 2023 and 2024, I think the number of filings in China is going to increase quite a bit, because the esports industry there is taking off. And, with a population of over 1 billion people, that has the potential to be the next largest growth space for esports. So, and I think that will coincide. We'll see that to fruition for some of the future patent filings past 2023. So that's my prediction.
Next slide. Here's a more detailed look into the breakdown of status specific to each of the top countries. On the left chart, you'll see we're presenting numbers of active grants for each country. As expected from the previous charts, you see the US is leading the way at this time. On the right, I've broken down the application status for non-granted cases. There's quite a bit of data that we're looking at here, so I won't go through it all, but in the yellow, you'll see the cases currently being examined, and blue represents those awaiting examination but published, and then dark gray equals the number of cases that have actually been abandoned in each country. Again, I previously mentioned the low abandonment rate, but this chart gives us a glimpse into the each country view. And then I did note, given the previous chart, I found it interesting to note the lower number of grants in the EPO in comparison to the number of pending cases, specifically those awaiting examination. So it seems like it's very early on in the EPO. Next slide. Here's a look at the top assignees within esports. Sony is dominating the overall space, but you'll also see a number of familiar and expected companies on the list. Many that Triet already mentioned: Microsoft, Twitch, Krafton, EA Sports, for example. I've also gone through and categorized the companies in this chart with the groupings that Triet previously discussed. These are broad categories, so many of the companies overlap into multiple areas, but try my best to give you an idea of the type of companies pursuing esports patents. It's fairly small in the bottom right corner there, but I've included the year-by-year filings on the slide as well. Based on the rest of the data, there's nothing too surprising other than to note, outside of Sony, these top companies are filing between 5 to 20 patents consistently year to year.
Yeah, I would even say it's Sony, although it's general, they're also a game cluster. I mean, they just have their hands in so many different things. So,
yeah, that's what I kind of meant by general, was they're probably involved throughout. So
Yeah, this is fascinating, and of course, Sony's been in the business for so long. I'm trying to see. Yeah, it's interesting that Nintendo is not in here, but they're probably more heavy in the copyright and trademark side of things versus the patent side.
Sure. Next slide here. Just to continue on the topic of types of patents, we're looking here at the top-cited patents within esports. You'll see the same companies on this list, and just to give you an idea of different types of patents, I was going to just run through a few of the titles, and feel free to comment, Kirt, on anything that may catch your eye. But event platform for peer-to-peer digital gaming competition, applying partial metrics in game environments. And then you'll see there are a few VR type patents, including one of the most heavily cited patents. That was interesting. Buffer reduction using frame dropping, and then creation of winter tournaments with fandom influence. Actually, Kirt is going to jump into a little bit more of a deep dive into this patent a little bit in the next few slides here. So that'll be interesting. But I also wanted to note, well, there's one patent that expires in 2025 on this list. Almost all these stretch into the 2030s for their estimated expiration date. So you can just see the early on set of this technology is we're pretty early. Next slide. Okay, patent valuation. This is out of PatSnap, and PatSnap software provides a patent valuation that is quite interesting and eye-catching for many people. As noted in this slide, this is based on many different factors, but some of them include forward citations, which we just saw, family size, patent age, and I believe, yeah, it says in there, 80 different patent indicators that they use to obtain this valuation. This landscape that we're looking at is being valued at almost 76 million, with the highest family that I saw was valued at $12 million. However, you'll see most of these families are valued on the lower end of this chart, specifically between $30,000 and $300,000, which is a large range, but that's what they're giving us. A big reason for this, as we just saw on the slide, is the technology is still young and accordingly would have smaller family sizes. We expect this valuation to continue to trend upward.
Yeah, well, one thing I want to add, Rob, is that I actually attended a presentation last Friday on the secondary market where people are selling different packages of patents and things like that to different buyers. And the figure that was given to us during the presentation was the average price for a patent being sold in the high-tech space was about $150,000. So independently, that sort of confirms what PatSnap is saying, where it's likely most of the patents are going to fall, or at least according to PatSnap, from 30 to 300K. But there's a breakdown here, but I bet if we dived a little bit deeper into the numbers, we're probably looking along the lines of an average patent valuation of 150K. So that, at least to me, that makes me feel good about these numbers, because it matches independently what a different presenter told us in a different presentation for the secondary market. So things match up.
That's helpful. And next slide. Yeah, and here's where I'm going to hand it off to Kirt to kind of run through the details of this patent.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I'm Kirt Iverson. I'm an intellectual property attorney here at Schwegman Lundberg. I also am a PC gamer. I've been for most of my life, and a Twitch streamer recently. I thought it would be interesting to take a look at one of the patents that was granted to one of the bigger players in the esports industry. And this one in particular is for Sony. And I was looking at why it's one of the top cited patents. And it looks like it's because it's focused on a popular concept that's very relevant today, which is integrating remote spectators into live esports events. So as esports have grown, this idea of remote participation is becoming more and more mainstream. Also, this is a relatively recently granted patent, so it's modern. It covers modern concepts related to esports streaming. The claims themselves cover a core technique related to identifying, selecting, and authorizing remote players into live events. It's just it focuses. If you look at the details of the claims, to me, it strikes me as being fairly narrow. However, because the application is kind of a foundational application in the space, I think it's getting more attention. I think people are building on the ideas that came out of this application, which is probably why it's one of the more cited patents. In particular, I want to look at the specific elements of the claims here. It would be I think it's fairly easy for a competitor to potentially work around the claims because the language is pretty specific about the types of things that must happen. But basically, a remote player is allowed to fill a vacancy within a game. And I think this may be relevant to Sony's Gran Turismo sport game, which is an esports game that's got a sponsor. I think it's overseen by one of the world governing bodies for automotive sport. And they do some esports competitions. And I think this is where it comes into play, where a person can be brought into the game as it's being conducted, and there's a vacancy, and they're able to just participate. And it controls the level of bandwidth also that's available to that remote player. They go from being a remote player to a participant, and the bandwidth has to be allocated differently because of that. And the claims kind of cover some of those specific changes that have to be made, like around the viewer context versus the participant context. Anyway, that's just one example of a patent that was granted to Sony in the esports space, and it kind of gives an idea of the types of things that an esports company may be pursuing currently in the esports realm. Next slide. Oh, okay. I think this is Amelia. Amelia, did you want to talk about this slide?
Yeah, I'll just provide some brief background for this. This information came from our Bloomberg Law database, and it is only covering, again, U.S. federal courts, so not even PTAB or post-grant proceedings, and is covering the companies as a whole. So you'll see about a third of these esports companies' litigation is related to patents, some copyright and trademark stuff as well. And for the non-IP litigation, because again, it's at that company level, it could be things like general or contract law, employment, civil rights laws, and other things that aren't necessarily related to esports. Next slide.
Okay, back to me. This is another patent that's currently being litigated. That's in the esports space. It's an interesting patent that involves two different companies that sponsor or allow wagering on their games. Skills Platform and Avia Games are the two parties involved. I think Avia Games does gin rummy tournaments, and Skills Game does solitaire and blackout type tournaments where you can wager on the results. The patent itself that's being litigated focuses on an interesting aspect related to fairness in the way the games are played. Basically, it controls or gives a technique for synchronizing games so that the two different instances of the games being played by the people that are involved in the wagering, probably, are synchronized and have the same random numbers to initialize the games, so that some of these games that are played use a random number to control where different things appear within the virtual world that's associated with the game. All kinds of different factors are controlled by these random numbers when you initially start the game. And so this patent relates to making sure the same random numbers are used across these instances that are involved. And it makes it a more fair environment for the players, especially when you're possibly having wagering associated with the games. You want to make sure that they're fair. So this is kind of interesting in that it's very important the fairness, even if you're not doing wagering, I think it's a very important aspect related to esports. And so that's being litigated between these two parties right now.
Yeah, hey Kirk, I just wanted to add, just to give also some background with the ongoing litigation. So Skills platform actually manually translated internal text messages from employees of VIA Games, and they discovered that VIA might have been using bots on the Skills platform to, I don't know, maybe upset the fairness and things like that. So I don't know if that's going to affect the litigation, but it's just an interesting point to bring up to the fact that Skills brought this to the attention of the judge. So it could impact some of the litigation moving forward, especially with respect to how these or this claim is being constructed in regard to fairness.
Right, that's interesting. Okay, next slide. Oh, okay. That's the end. Are we going to open up for questions, Triet?
We can. We have a little bit of time. Let's see. For Melanie, she had a question where do these characters with protection fit with homemade merchandise that's sold at events like Comic-Con? And probably also you could probably extend it to products that also have the likeness of some of these characters on sites like Etsy and things like that. I mean, I would probably say if you were making characters in the likeness of some of these characters, that's probably an infringement. Whether or not some of these companies are going to go after these vendors, it's another thing. So I would probably venture that these companies likely wouldn't go after it because it would be kind of a bad look, especially if some of these vendors are really small. But who knows? Some of these companies are very litigious, especially in protecting trademarks and likeness and things like that. So maybe these vendors, even though they're allowed to be to sell these items at the conventions themselves, they may get a letter from an attorney after the fact for cease and desist and requesting them not to do it in the future.
Yeah, can I just hop on there too?
Yep,
And
of course.
add that, yeah, sometimes these companies will be litigious. I remember, what was it, University of Georgia went after a kid for using their logo on a t-shirt a few years ago. But one thing I'll mention too is that with Amazon and maybe Etsy too, I can't remember, but definitely Amazon, if you have a registered USPTO trademark, you can register it with Amazon and demand that they remove any infringing items off of their platform worldwide, which is a nice benefit.
Okay, so Melanie also had a question where, I mean, we touched upon this a little bit. Esports is now a college varsity program. How do you envision this changing the landscape when it comes to sponsorship? So that's interesting because with the whole introduction of name, image, and likeness in college sports, that came down where players, you know, on a sports team, football, basketball, or whatever, they can finally make revenue from their name, image, and likeness, and not be disqualified, for instance, by the NCAA or something like that for making money. So to that point, for sure, definitely with the introduction of that, if you are in an esports varsity program at a college or a university, you will be able to make additional money from sponsorships and things of that nature. And it's totally it's fine. It's legal at this point, so there's no issues with that. So that may attract even more kids into this space because not only you get a free ride at college, but you can make additional money from sponsorships on top of that. You know, so it's a great deal either way you look at it.
Triet, there was a question in general chat about design patents and how they might be applicable. And I was thinking, you know, from a strategy perspective, I would think these companies would be particularly interested in protecting the ornamental design of some of their games. So it's maybe even more relevant than even, recently the Samsung Apple litigation came down to design patents rather than their utility patents. So I think it's
right.
very important to consider design patents as part of your intellectual property strategy, especially in this esports area.
Yeah, I think it's going to be multifaceted. To the extent that you can file a utility patent, of course, like go for it. That makes a lot of sense. But you're right, the design aspects, especially. I mean, we looked at some of the trademarks for the controllers and things like that. They were likely probably also going to file at the same time design patents for the shape and the ornamental look at some of these hardware specific things, especially on consoles or PC accessories of that nature. So although we didn't cover it in the presentation, we also handle design patents here at the firm. We have experts here in-house, so that is we didn't neglect it on purpose, but just for the sake of time, we didn't dive into that because the whole design aspect could probably easily be another 30-minute discussion itself. Okay, and let me see. Oh, so someone requested a copy of the slide presentation. Yes, of course, we will email it to you. And then Melanie, I don't think this was a question. This was just more of a comment.
Mark asked a question about, does the firm get involved in validity opinions on the esports space? I think we do. Yes.
Yes, we do. Yes, we do. Yes, we do. We can draft validity opinions for sure. And I have done so myself for not recently, but in the past for game accessory manufacturers like the controllers and things like that. So I have experience in that area. Okay, when should a recently established esports team consider trademark protection? I mean, that's something that I would probably feel to the trademark team, but probably as soon as possible when you have an inkling of when the team is about to be active, and likely probably a little bit before that.
Yeah, I'll just add to when it comes to like trademarks and copyright, you can apply for them at any time. With a patent, you really have that 12 months once it's publicly disclosed, but you are not limited by that with a trademark protection. So you can apply whenever you need to, as long as it's in commerce.
I think there's certain benefits if you have already used your trademark in commerce before you try to register it, but I think you can also file an intent to use. So there is really no time requirement for it.
Yeah, that's a great point, Kurt. I agree. Okay, I think that's it. There are no more questions that I can see. So yeah, this has been a great discussion. I want to thank my fellow panelists for contributing. And if you have any questions, you can reach out to us offline. Hopefully there are contact links in the slide deck, but the slide deck is downloadable through our website. And for anyone that sign up and request a CLE credit, that's still pending, but we should get that approved shortly. And that's it. Any other of my fellow panelists, do you have anything to add?
Nope, nothing more from me.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone. It's been a great discussion, and have a great day, and thank you for attending.
Thanks, everyone.